So, welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and today we make a return to these kind of Civil War focused ones, it seems. We've seen the dwarves fight one another, we've seen elves fight one another somewhat recently as well, and now we have the typical allies, or at the very least sort of overlord and servant, I suppose, between Gondor and Dol Amroth. So Dol Amroth trying to win their quote-unquote freedom from Gondor, perhaps. I think as well this is a map that I have seen before, or something very, very similar to it. And this has the feeling of kind of set up almost like a pitch battle, really, because the fight is going to take place entirely within the settlement, although Dol Amroth are starting off outside of it, so Gondor perhaps more so the defenders than the Dol Amrothians. But yeah, it's going to be another one of these cityscape battles, disparate buildings as well, sort of dotted around the place. And we're going to be seeing sort of street combat pretty much entirely for this one. But yeah, going to be, like I said, I don't know if this is an entirely new map or not. It does look very familiar though. I do think I've shown it, or something, like I said, maybe a slightly edited version of it quite a while ago now. But nonetheless, we shall go through the army composition, starting off with the de facto attackers for today, with Mihai, who played as Gondor in the last battle replay we saw, playing as Dol Amroth this time around. And we see here the higher end units that Dol Amroth have available to them. Haven Guard of Athalond, the very best that Dol Amroth can field, and indeed heavy swordsmen, really the one infantry category where Dol Amroth do have a noticeable advantage over their Gondorian overlords. But perhaps, I mean, I don't know really. I think Gondor, especially when they're allowed to dig in, this may very well prove to be a pretty difficult task for Dol Amroth, at least in terms of what the factions themselves are actually good at. The players are going to have to take up a little bit more slack, perhaps. But the Talon Knights, as we will see, Dol Amroth do have access to armor piercing, but it's concentrated in very specific units. The Talon Knights, at the very least, are a higher tier unit, and they do have some pretty good defensive stats to back them up as well, with multiple HP, a shield, so it means that Gondor are not going to be able to get rid of them quite so quickly, and those maces will deal the extra damage that they need them to. We have several units, unsurprisingly, of the Dol Amroth Halberdiers, because this is the primary vector by which Dol Amroth will be dealing said armor-piercing damage. They can be outranged by other polearms, potentially, that Gondor can bring, but that's by the by, really. When you need armor-piercing damage, then this is what you will go for and fall back on as Dol Amroth. And let's not forget that this sort of unit can be fairly expensive, but as we've already said, the armor-piercing is necessary. Gondor, if there's one thing they're always going to be weak to, it is that armor-piercing damage. We have some Dol Amroth men-at-arms here as well. Pretty good for what they are, especially with that big shield value. I mean, one thing that Gondor will probably be trying to do is utilising their very strong archer corps. And Dol Amroth's standard infantry do have slightly bigger shields than many other of the Western Kingdoms, so that may yet prove to be a real boon for Dol Amroth as the battle goes along. But when it comes to the basic infantry facing off against one another, there's not a huge amount of difference there. Gondor have a slight edge as long as they upgrade all their armour, but we shall see. A gap here, hidden units, could be Rangers of Nimrodel, could be a couple of other things as well. Standard Dol Amroth archers without the armour upgrade, this is all well and good, they are a decent skirmishing archer, but it's difficult for Dol Amroth in this situation to know how much to invest in their archer corps, because it's very likely that Gondor will be able to control the flow of the battle that way, and you may have to be a little bit more aggressive than you would like. But you do still need a ranged presence in order to be able to contest that with the Gondorians. Several units of Belfalas Marines here as well. Javelins, I mean, it's fairly rare actually that we see 3 units of Belfalas Marines take to the field, but perhaps this is an area where Dol Amroth feels as though they can exploit the situation to their advantage, because they and Gondor basically have the same expertise when it comes to javelins. Gondor maybe a little bit more so now the Citadel Guard have a few volleys in them, but Dol Amroth's bringing a lot of Belfalas Marines nonetheless. Several units of Dol Amroth Spearmen as well, very similar to the men-at-arms that we've seen previously. Good defensive abilities, especially given their bigger shields, but of course spears like this, especially when it's very similar setups in terms of basic units facing off against one another, the spear malice does mean that they're going to lack a lot of sting, which they may otherwise have possessed. Meanwhile, we have T.S. Niehoff, another Dol Amroth army, again going for the Belfalas Marines, setting the stall out here to be in loose formation, fairly readily across his army. The Dol Amroth spearmen over here do not have the armour upgrade, so they're going to be a little bit less resilient than the ones that we just saw from Tumithai's army, but they will still do the job, like we said, more defensive in nature anyway. Several units of the Dol Amroth men-at-arms, once again, we're seeing them without the armour upgrade. I mean, pretty much universally in these new patch previews, whenever we've seen Dol Amroth, we have seen the armour upgrades, but not this time, from TS Niehoff again, maybe not wanting to spend that extra money, and also, to be fair, they're still going to be doing the same job, and as we just mentioned, Gondor probably going to have a slight edge in that regard anyway, so it really just depends on what the extra money was spent on here by TS as to whether it's going to be worthwhile or not. Once again, we have the Dol Amroth halberdiers, again sans the armour upgrade, but as we've already mentioned, very, very important if Dol Amroth are going to go on to be successful in this battle. We're seeing some Perithal champions, which is a good thing to see. As we've already mentioned, this is the class of unit that Dol Amroth do have a little bit more about them in, and yeah, big base damage and big melee defense values as well in comparison to many other shock infantry units. More armor piercing from the Talon Knights, and I did notice as well there is some cavalry on the hilltop. If they can be used effectively, then the Arathirim here could be very, very deadly indeed. Obviously they were, in the last version of the game actually, the best unit of Lance Knights that the game had to offer because of a huge defensive advantage they had secretly over their peers. I don't know if they're going to have the room to be super effective here, but we shall see. Haven Guard here also. Over here we have add-in men, who once again Dol Amroth spearmen, this time a return to upgrading the armour, trying to get them a little bit closer to the Gondorians in that regard. We also have upgraded Dol Amroth archers actually as well, which is interesting to see. I think 2 levels of armour upgrade by the look of it as well, but this is a more expensive upgrade for Dol Amroth to purchase than the Gondorians have for the equivalency, but it's not a huge amount of difference in gold, but it is the sort of thing which is in Gondor's favour. We'll see if the Dol Amroth archers have enough about them with both levels of armour upgrade to try and contest with the Gondorians when we see what they have. We have Dol Amroth men-at-arms here as well, fully upgraded, and again it gets them a little bit closer, not necessarily the most exciting of units, and when you do consider as well that they do have a slightly lower unit count than the equivalent Gondorians, we'll see if leaning on them this much is going to pay dividends. We also have a couple of units of Talon Knights. Once again we have more halberdiers, Haven Guard of Thalond as well, and we have the Belfalas Marines here also. Arathirim of Dol Amroth also in close attendance. Moving on to the final Dol Amroth army, we have Tommy the Rage Quitter. Similar story here as well, I would imagine. Dol Amroth spearmen, upgraded Dol Amroth archers, Perithal champions dipping into the heavy swordsmen a little bit more as well, giving them that slightly more aggressive feeling. Several units of Dol Amroth men-at-arms, Dol Amroth halberdiers, Belfalas Marines once again dipping into them a little bit more, possibly some hidden rangers as well, and then 2 Talon Knights and Haven Guard. So yeah, pretty much an amalgamation. There's a few minor differences between all 4 of these attacking armies, but for the most part they're all leaning on the same sort of things, a core of men-at-arms and halberdiers, and then a little bit of quality around the edges to try and make a difference against the Gondorians, which we shall move on to right now. And starting off with the Womb Raiders army here, we have the Veterans of Osgiliath fully upgraded. We've seen fully upgraded Veterans of Osgiliath quite a lot, and I think that's because they're going to be such an effective tool for Gondor to use in terms of really taking control of the long skirmishing phases that we can often see. Veterans of Osgiliath with this level of armour upgrade can easily beat most, sort of all basic archers that have got the sort of standard stat set and standard armour upgrades. Veterans of Osgiliath are a step above that, and the fact that they can upgrade their armour 3 times really does make a difference when trading arrows back and forth. And of course locked morale and being pretty damn good in melee also means that they are pretty versatile as well. So I think we're going to see them as a bit of an ever-present for the Gondorians with their fanciest armour. Just in behind, Pelagia Marines, going to be quite a common sight I think, the Pelagia Marines and Belfalas Marines on the field today. Going to be interesting to see who comes out on top of that particular back and forth. Gondor infantry are here, we've got the Axemen of Lasarnak as well, armour upgrades all round, which is not too surprising. And of course the Axemen of Lasarnak armour piercing is going to be useful against Dol Amroth as well. Armour piercing useful against most Western Kingdoms of course. We've got the Guards of Osgiliath in here as well, going to be very, very important for trying to mitigate the effectiveness of those Dol Amroth halberdiers, which is probably the unit Gondor would be most concerned about from a melee perspective. Fully upgraded Gondor archers as well, so Gondor very keen on winning the archer tussle, which is something that was always in their wheelhouse. Upgraded Athelian Rangers as well, giving them a little bit more resilience. Obviously Rangers with their high damage as well. The Haven Guard will probably be their choice of targets if they had the pick of the litter. Nimlothians, we've seen them pretty much every time Gondor have taken to the field recently as well. Plenty of those Gondorian infantrymen also. Moving on to Hidden, we have Gondor Archers, we have Athelian Rangers once more, although unupgraded Gondor Archers this time. Gondor Infantry is only the first level of armour upgrade, so it is interesting to see all the variances between how much stock people are placing into their armour upgrades. Even Gondor, with their cheaper upgrades, it's not necessarily a given that you'll see it universally. Gondor Infantry, we've got Fountain Guard in there as well, a little bit more aggressive, but they will be pretty effective against most of what Dol Amroth have as well, as long as they don't get caught on the end of the halberds. Citadel Guard, giving a little bit more in terms of their javelin punch, and of course their effectiveness in melee is something that Dol Amroth will not enjoy seeing either. And then just in behind, Gondor Infantry, and we've got more Fountain Guard as well. Guards Vosgiliath, yeah, pretty similar overall, though there is another unit way back there, the Lords of Gondor, ready to start wheeling around the settlement perhaps to try and make something happen. But then further up the hill over here, we have got Gondor Archers, we've got them fully upgraded as well. We've got Pelagian Marines, a couple of them, Axemen of Lasarnak, Citadel Guard, a couple of units, Fountain Guard, 2 units of them, huge amount of Gondor Infantry as well. This is Dabo's army, and we've got some more Gondor Infantry. I mean, this is a hugely sort of a big focus on the basics of Gondor here. They've got Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard, yes, but a lot of infantry, spears as well in backup. We've got the Axemen of Lasarnak with that armour-piercing punch, and the Nimlothian Honour Guard also being the sort of centrepiece, really, of the army, as is very often the case. And finally, last but not least, we have Medexa playing on this flank, interestingly enough, kind of outside the settlement. I don't know if they're going to be able to get up this ramp quickly enough in order to be able to get back into defensive shape, but we shall see. A couple of units of spears, units of infantry, Fountain Guard here also, Axemen of Lasarnak, a couple of units of Citadel Guard, Pelagian Marines, more Gondor Archers with the full armour upgrades, and then some veterans of Osgiliath and Nimlothian Honour Guard. So kind of similar for both sides. The overall looks of the armies are kind of similar. There's a lot of crossover between all of the defenders and then all of the attackers, but there's slight variances between what players are valuing more. We shall see how this goes. I will make a little bit of a cut because I do think, I mean, it may be that these two armies clash immediately, or it may be that the Dol Amrothians do let the Gondorians move themselves around a little bit, though I don't know, maybe not, we shall see. I'm not certain I would. I think it would be a more interesting affair perhaps if they didn't, but I guess we'll find out momentarily as the armies march towards one another, and I shall rejoin when the first blows are being struck. So as everyone starts to trundle into position, it does seem that this is going to be more of the standardised attack-defence dynamic, with Gondor being allowed to shift their way into position and Dol Amroth taking up position immediately behind them. It's probably worth saying that this area of the map is probably going to be one of the more difficult ones for Dol Amroth to try and bludgeon their way through, simply because of how narrow it is and how well set up Gondor are for digging themselves into defensive positions like this. Not that Dol Amroth are helpless in such situations, but it's going to be a pretty difficult task for them to start making headway over here, and over here probably is where they're going to want to focus a lot of their efforts, given the fact that slightly more raised terrain, slightly better defensive ground perhaps for the defenders to really take advantage of, though it does look as though they are going to split off pretty much perfectly 2 and 2, which means the attackers could maybe take advantage of that, maybe try and put a little bit more pressure on one of these two positions and completely split them off from one another by occupying the town in the middle of the two raised plateaus that Gondor appear to be making their defence around. With the Dol Amroth also over here. Excuse me. Haven Guard of Thalond being the centrepiece of their army, of course. I may have rejoined the battle a little soon, so we will go up to ×2 speed just as the battle starts to wheeze into life. But yeah, as I've said, I think Gondor, based on the level of quality they do have available to them, based on the good defensive ground they have and the way that their faction just generally is set up with its units, I do think that they find themselves in a pretty good place going forward in this battle. But be all and end all. Stuff like the Athelian Range as well could prove to be extremely potent. Gondor archers already starting to open up on Dol Amroth as they move forwards. So Dol Amroth have a fire lit under them to try and move a little bit more quickly, and as if that wasn't enough, Dol Amroth, Halberdiers, Parathor Champions, even the Haven Guard, all of these unshielded units of course could find themselves being whittled down by even the most basic of Gondor's archers. Even over here as well, the buildings, the way that they're positioned just makes these choke points that a little bit more awkward to try and go through. There are quite a lot of ways up onto these plateaus, but none of them are particularly appealing, so you're going to have to use as many routes as you can. I'm a little bit surprised that seeing here added men start to move into position as well. Trying to move along through here would not go amiss. And then over here, T.S. Niehoff going to be making his way up onto the plateaus as well, trying to make it less of an equation, or trying to make the terrain less of an equation, trying to fight Gondor on more even ground. Will be an important facet of this battle, of course. Haven't really seen anything other than those initial Gondor archer flurries on the other side truly in this battle yet. Athelian Rangers in a good position as well to immediately start opening up. I mean, the base damage on them is very, very scary. And Tommy going to have to make a decision of what to do here pretty quickly. Too many of his units under fire immediately. You can't afford to be taking too many losses like this. You can see the Belfast Marines. We mentioned them as a potentially pretty important unit for Dol Amroth in trying to punch their way through the fortified choke points that Gondor are going to be trying to use in this fight, and if they lose too many of them like this, they will not be able to do such. Dol Amroth archers, fully upgraded, going to be trying to move in to answer somewhat the Gondorian archer fire. Much of Tommy's army does appear to be making its way up here now, though. We'll still have to go through the labyrinth-like areas of these buildings over here. And still, Athelian Rangers still firing away. It's been a pretty tough start for Dol Amroth so far, just based upon that. You can see some of the Dol Amroth forces now wheeling forwards from added men. Need to take some of the pressure off Tommy, otherwise added men is going to have to try and win this battle all on his own. Dol Amroth's spearmen just going to get some sort of presence for Dol Amroth up here on this raised terrain. Gondorians could yet be engaged in melee pretty soon as well. The Dol Amroth men-at-arms going to start to make their way round. Of these units, I mean, trying to link up the times where these assaults actually make contact with the Gondorian defensive lines is going to be important, but Too High seems to be right on top of that anyway. Mostly infantry around here, not a huge amount of range support based on the ground available to them. That's not too surprising. There's like a great deal of really effective archer points for Gondor to use on the other side. Dol Amroth archers now starting to trade back and forth with the Gondor archers, though as we have mentioned, I do think the Gondorians will be far better set up for winning skirmish fights like this. They have the terrain advantage, they have the unit advantage as well, so Dol Amroth are going to have to try and find other methods to win their freedom here. A lot of Athelian Rangers as well, which we've already seen used to pretty devastating effect. Much of Tommy's army still biding its time. Dol Amroth archers trudging their way into position as well. Gondor feeling confident enough to be able to conserve some of their archer ammunition, the veterans of Osgiliath not being pressed into service just yet. Gondor archers, on the other hand, will be. Amroth Men-at-Arms now taking hits from the veterans of Osgiliath as well. Sending individual units like this I don't think is really going to be in Dol Amroth's best interest. Yes, they've got the armour and shield values, but it's only one unit. The Gondor infantry should be able to fairly easily deal with them. It is worth mentioning here that there is also the Gondor and Dol Amroth cavalry. Or the Dol Amroth cavalry going to be making its way forwards here. I mean, these are Gondor infantry. Charge from the Arathiran could be pretty effective. Not the most devastating charge there, but every little helps. Gondor spearmen just in behind, and I mean a fair amount of Tumahai's army moving around here. I would be a little bit concerned perhaps that the Dol Amroth forces are not necessarily moving as one force. There does appear to be a little bit lopsided. Seeing some javelins split the gap there, trying to go after the Dol Amroth halberdiers. Men-at-Arms also in place. Gondor well prepared for an advance over here though, I'd have to say. Dol Amroth archers in a decent place to try and get some hits, but again, very, very dense formations of infantry this. It's all well and good for the time being, but are Dol Amroth going to have enough strength on each of these angles to be able to be victorious here? Arathiran on the retreat. Slowly Tumahai's army is getting around to the flank as well. Still trying to whittle down the Gondorians with their own archer fire. If you can counter skirmish into something like the Athelian Rangers, that may be a little bit more worthwhile, but for now, we're not seeing a huge amount of dead Gondorians up here. Seeing far more of the opposite in this battle thus far. We're still in really the footnotes section of this battle. None of these manoeuvres and plays and plots are really going to be all that important. As long as Dol Amroth strike when the time is right, that will be the thing which determines their success, and Gondor being prepared to repel an advance from all sides is going to be what determines theirs. Dol Amroth archers maybe trying to go back and forth. I mean, Dol Amroth men-at-arms will of course be far superior to them in melee, so they will get chased off, but I mean, they can't afford to chase them too far. If they do, they'll simply get surrounded and destroyed, and Tommy can scant afford any more of that. Still adding men, shooting some archers into the Gondorian defensive positions, but surely this is where the upgrades on the Gondorians will really start to pay dividends. Again, Rangers of Nimrodel. Trying to use Rangers of Nimrodel as a skirmishing archer, I think, as a skirmishing archer is, I think, a bit foolhardy. This is the sort of damage that you can't afford to be throwing to the wolves quite like this. Rangers have got a lot of damage, but they can't really withstand an awful lot. And they could prove to be too valuable to throw away like this, but we'll see. Archers still though, I mean, they can scarcely miss with how many Gondorians are up there. That is the flip side of this equation. What have we here? More Dol Amrothians ready to potentially move up. I mean, basically this is the first melee engagement we've seen start off. It's not going to end too well for Dol Amroth without any sort of reinforcements to back them up. There's more Dol Amroth spearmen in the distance, but the upgraded Gondorians, in addition to the fact that some of them are wielding those swords, means that it will be a relatively easy task for Gondor to maintain their defensive line here. Dol Amroth still a little bit too stretched here. There's nothing Dol Amroth can really commit to at this stage that would make them, or that would put them in a really advantageous position. Gondor over here as well, managing to do the same sort of thing. Many of T.S. Neoph's army starting to rout off. Of course, T.S. with the unupgraded Dol Amrothians. The Dol Amroth halberdiers, we mentioned how important they could be, but obviously they're also going to be one of the primary targets for Gondor's archers and javelins if they get the opportunity to use them as such, and here at the very least they are. The armor piercing will do something at the very least, but it won't be able to do everything for them, and so far this has gone pretty poorly for TS as well. So Dol Amroth needs some sort of victory on the field here, otherwise the battle could start to get away from them a little bit. The places they've committed their resources to so far have not been particularly effective. They've been taking more of the ranged damage. They haven't really got going in terms of any of their infantry advances. They haven't really synced up with one another all that well. Tumahai is moving forward now, but even he, I think, doesn't really have the level of pressure over here that will be needed. Arathirim of Dol Amroth. And there are still more Dol Amrothians over here. Rangers of Nimrodel firing into the Gondorians that are over there. This will do a decent amount of damage, but it's definitely a worry for Dol Amroth that they haven't really gained much momentum on the field in any particular area yet. Dol Amroth spearmen taking Gondor infantry over here as well, so they're putting pressure on more and more angles of the Gondorian defence now, but is that going to be enough? At least one of these they need to be a little bit more effective. I mean, this is a big advance actually from Tommy. This could be the sort of thing which really helps to turn Dol Amroth's fortunes around. So far it's a very even fight. I mean, the Nimlothian Honor Guard being at the centre of things for Gondor will really help them out. Arrow fire flying back and forth from both sides. You can see the Talon Knights trying to be the Dol Amroth answer to the quality that Gondor do have as well, but Dol Amroth need to continue now to bring more units in. Rangers of Nimrodel. This is a little bit more like it. They were never going to win this battle by taking the slower approach, Dol Amroth, but trying to put Gondor under the cosh and maybe cause a little bit of panic could be the answer. More Talon Knights over here, though they've taken a fair amount of damage, to the point the Gondor infantry will probably be feeling pretty confident about their chances. More reinforcements are here from Tommy though, so he's gone all in. I don't think he had too much of a choice really, given how the initial archer volleys did whittle him down a little bit. Added men going to be moving forward with his own support as well, or at least in some places. Men-at-arms. There are the Lords of Gondor, of course, let's not forget, but they're not going to be doing much good cooped up behind their own infantrymen. I don't think Dol Amroth are going to make too much headway over here either, but at the very least it is siphoning off resources that could be trying to stop Tommy, especially those pikemen. Those could be put to really good use over here to try and keep Dol Amroth at arm's length, although it doesn't look like Dol Amroth are really going to be able to make any of this stick. More reinforcements moving forward now, which is all well and good, but Axeman of Lasarnak being on the front line probably isn't helping Dol Amroth's chances any. Meanwhile, continuing to push forward. I mean, again, a little bit more like it. Perithil champions will be able to do more in melee against these Gondorians than a single unit of unupgraded spears, but the numbers still very much in Gondor's favour over here. I think Dol Amroth on this side of the battlefield simply aren't able to commit enough units to any one place to really force Gondor onto the back foot heavily. Over here maybe a little bit more for Tumahai. Moving forward and doing a decent amount of damage here to these Gondorian defensive positions, but is it going to be quick enough? More units coming forward as well, more Dol Amroth spearmen. Over here are we starting to see a little bit more. I mean, Medex has got some units in reserve. Dol Amroth have moved forward, getting in and amongst the archers. Tumahai trying to make it so that these Gondor archers have less of an easy time at shooting into this wing of T.S. Niehoff's army, which Dol Amroth have managed to regain some territory. Whether it's at an efficient cost of their soldiers, I don't know. Amroth men-at-arms not going to do too well against Axeman of Lasarnak, you'd fear. So the small matter of Dol Amroth men-at-arms over here. The Gondor archers still subject to the weird bendy bow glitch. At least some of them. More and more Dol Amrothians making their way forward. More and more halberdiers as well, and in these sort of close quarters engagements, initially it was just that one unit of spears which got itself surrounded, but now it's a little bit of a different situation for Dol Amroth. Able to roll forwards, and Medex are now under a little bit of pressure. Plenty of reinforcements that can still be committed from both sides, so neither will be feeling too comfortable yet, but again, Dol Amroth maybe starting to spread their wings a little bit. Here at the back, also struggling a little bit under more and more Dol Amroth forces. Of course, Dol Amroth probably don't have another wave of attack left in them. It's either going to be victory or death for them from this point onwards. Dol Amroth men-at-arms jogging forwards. Across the way. Guards from Skiliath and supporting units still able to keep Dol Amroth comfortably in check there, but it was over here where we were seeing maybe that called into question a little bit more. Dol Amroth do seem to have pushed back against the Gondorian position, but it's still very much a fairly even fight, though as we've already mentioned, Dol Amroth probably have less left in the tank than Gondor in terms of what they can commit. Stuff like the Nimlothians, of course, so dangerous. Citadel Guard on the front line as well. Javelins, though, hitting the Gondorians. Decent position that for the Balthalas Marines to take up. There are still a few more units that can be committed forwards. Those halberds, as the battle has gone on, starting to become more and more of a factor. Gondor infantry against Dol Amroth men-at-arms, very similar kinds of units, but veterans offering that unbreakable morale. Halberdiers offering the polearm with armour piercing. Flaming shot being utilised as well. Morale is of course the sort of thing which any human faction can be exploited for the most part. Gondor and Dol Amroth certainly stouter and have more courage than your run-of-the-mill Orcish faction, for example, but when their leadership starts to fail them and when they're put into grim positions, the fire arrows are the sort of thing which can really be the final nail in a coffin, so that's what Gondor will be hoping for here. Still this position very much holding up. Dol Amroth halberdiers moving in. Some reinforcements still available. Over here, meanwhile, Citadel Guard using their javelins. I mean, we are seeing more examples on the battlefield now of Dol Amroth managing to use some aggression to call into question the structure of the Gondor defences. Dol Amroth men-at-arms in and around these forces now. Citadel Guard and Pelagia Marines in the background, however, will be able to do the business there as well. Cavalry trying to get in here. I mean, cavalry, by their very presence, can be a bit of a morale shock tool as well. They don't necessarily have to land a charge for units to flee at the sight of them. There goes a Gondorian general as well. I believe as well that may be Medex's over here. I think, yes. There he is, dead on the floor. The Honor Guard and Fountain Guard. I mean, the general may have died, but Gondor do seem to have things a little bit more under control here. The huge amount of armour piercing offered by both Fountain Guard variants and the Axemen of the Sarnak are going to prove to be too much here for what remains of Dol Amroth. A few pot shots coming from the archers down on the low ground. Dol Amroth still have a bit of momentum down here at the base of the hill as well. Talon Knights moving forward with their maces, but generally speaking, Gondor looking pretty good in this corner of the settlement. Rangers of Nimrodel on the way forwards as well. Something else to do some fairly hefty damage. Meanwhile, the fact that the Arathirim are now in behind enemy lines is also going to prove to be a real pain for Gondor, but Fortunately for Gondor, they are one of the factions which can deal with this sort of thing better than most. They've got a large amount of spears and pole arms, and even the heavy axemen, of course, in sustained melee are the sort of units which can deal with that, but the Arathirim can be so devastating when they get a charge that will be cold comfort to Gondor if they see entire units get mown down like grass. Gondor infantry, though, shaken up. Belfalas Marines starting to see this now. Dol Amroth claiming the momentum. Could this be the classic case of early on things not looking so good for the attackers, but as the battle goes on, they do manage to claim the edge. Looking a little bit like that at the minute, isn't it? Gondor archers, again ranged forces, it's always difficult to keep track of how much damage all of these units are doing, but they're in a good position here to offer support to the largely Fountain Guard front line. The long spears of the Fountain Guard up against the long swords of the Perithil Champions and Haven Guard, pretty much a perfect showcase of what each faction is all about in melee, but there are Talon Knights in behind the Fountain Guard as well. Will have a big effect on things with their own armour piercing, of course. Rangers of Nimrodal in position as well, but what began somewhat unpromisingly for TS Niehoff is starting to turn around a little bit. Over here, meanwhile, you can still see the blue of Dol Amroth very easily bottled up by the silver of Gondor on that particular hill. And then over here, Gondor look to still have things under control on this side of the settlement as well. So for the moment, it's looking like Gondor may win this side and Dol Amroth may win the other, but there's still plenty of time for this to turn on its head. Gondor infantry moving forward now more aggressively. We're seeing over here more Arathirim smashing their way through Athelian Rangers, though not overly devastating. Dol Amroth, of course, well renowned for their cavalry. Hopefully with this newer version of the game we'll see a little bit more of what cavalry is capable of. Not the best of charges there, unfortunately, but based on the room they have to work with, can't blame the Dol Amroth Knights too much for that. Still enough to shake the Gondorians up a little bit though. And so far it has been Gondor which have showcased more fragility, mental fragility, than Dol Amroth. Let's see if that holds true.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Dol Amroth's spearmen facing off against the fully upgraded veterans. The Arathirim charging in there again, not the most effective of charges, and there are a Fountain Guard in here, so as soon as the Fountain Guard turn around that will probably be a rapid depletion of their remaining numbers. Again, they start to fall away. I don't think the Arathirim are going to survive this encounter, honestly. Lords of Gondor also in here to try and hammer that home. Lords of Gondor actually still pretty much at full strength, so they haven't been used yet, whereas the Arathirim across the whole field really have been largely expended. That could be important later on, especially if it proves to be an extremely close battle. Fountain Guard on the way forward, taking point blank fire from the Dol Amroth archers. Of course Fountain Guard will be easily able to deal with Dol Amroth archers in melee, but the amount of damage they're taking just getting to them here might be too much for them to bear. One final volley as well. Several more of them perish. Rangers of Nimrodal, yeah, Gondor very much exposed here. Routing the Fountain Guard is no mean feat. It's understandable here. Belfalas Marines trying to help finish off the remaining pockets of Gondor resistance back here, but most of these units, there are still Nimlothian Honor Guard, Citadel Guard. They won't go down quietly, but Dol Amroth should be able to claim all of this territory for themselves. More Fountain Guard coming down from the defensive position which Medexa was successful in for the most part over here. And indeed is still having some success. Fountain Guard going up against the Haven Guard in a very narrow corridor. I think the Haven Guard, well, 102. don't know, numbers-wise, that may be difficult for the Haven Guard, the Fountain Guard, with the damage values to be able to take them on, but if all things were equal there, the Haven Guard should win that, so we'll keep an eye. Archers still doing their thing. The other unit of Haven Guard under T.S. Niehoff's command over here as well. Plenty more support for them over here, mind you. And I don't think the remnants of Medex's successful defensive force are going to be enough to push Dol Amroth out of their newfound gains. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle.
Our ally lies dead, slain by the enemy. We must help his men avenge him.
Another Gondorian general falls. Again, this could be very different if these were Dol Amroth generals that were perishing. Then their morale would perhaps be closer to snapping, but as it has been, to be fair, this was always going to happen eventually for Dol Amroth. This hill position was always going to be quite difficult to claim. Yeah, but it is looking like the split between the two sides is going to happen, so Gondor probably going to be victorious over here, Dol Amroth probably on the other side, so it's going to be a meeting of the minds in the middle to see who can pull out a more comprehensive victory. Rangers still with a bit of ammunition, and this is the sort of thing which can make a difference. At this point, if you feel as though you're going to be unsuccessful on one side, the best you can do is do as much damage as possible to give your allies the best chance. Earthall Champion's still waiting as well. Something else you can do, of course, is try and hang back a little bit, try and just make the fight last as long as possible. So then you can have at least something to assist your allies in the late game. And I say that, I mean, the Haven Guard of Athalon doing very, very well over here. And another unit of them as well, so maybe it's not quite so cut and dry as I was thinking. Maybe Dol Amroth can yet win both sides. Where are the Lords of Gondor, I wonder? Here they are. Can they be used effectively? Flaming shot being sprayed high. Rothians still doing their thing. Meanwhile, cavalry. Gondor 35, Arathuran 17. There goes a Dol Amroth general. Good charge from the Arathuran though into the backs of what remains of those in the Rothian Honor Guard, and that might be enough to finally break Gondor's resolve over on this side of the field. Citadel Guard still alive. Still eager, though tired. Dol Amroth Halberdiers also being added to the mix. I mean, similar stories are over on the other side. Gondor, the best that they can do at this point really is just keep this fight going for as long as possible, just do as much damage as they can, even if overall victory is not likely. Meanwhile, you can see here the bendy bow glitch, which looks kind of horrifying. I feel like kind of look like many daddy longlegs insects sprouting up from the ground. Cavalry, I mean, certainly based on how willing they've been to use it, I think the Arathuran have definitely had the best of the cavalry play on the field so far, but that's not to say the Lords of Gondor can't still be effective. They could yet prove to be a really important asset wherever they've gone. Well, here they are. Can Gondor win this fight over here? Earthall Champion's being committed forward. Dol Amroth making a play to maybe try and put this battle beyond Gondor at this point. Fixing set for those Pelagia Marines. Gondor Archers still doing their thing. there goes another Gondorian general. Loss of another general could prove to be pretty important. Again, locked morale on the veterans of Osgiliath will help Gondor's defensive line keep some sort of cohesion, if nothing else. Numbers, I mean, Haven Guard's still pretty damn healthy. I think the margin of victory is going to be important here, and even if Gondor do manage to win over here, I don't know if they're going to have enough left to defeat what Dol Amroth have available to them still on the other side. And indeed, we may also start to see Dol Amroth start to move away from this area now that I think total victory has been achieved. Haven Guard, 52 remain. Very, very bloody fights across the entirety of the field, but yeah, Dol Amroth completely successful over here now. Gondor no longer have really any sort of presence. I see you. Getting a little bit more for your kill count, are you? Fair enough. So, Gondor's last hope remains over here, and like I said, I don't think they have enough. Maybe they have enough to be able to defeat Dol Amroth over here, especially with the cavalry managing to get a few good charges, potentially into the Parathil champions. That might be enough to break Dol Amroth's spirit over here, but I don't think they have enough to be able to withstand another wave, which is exactly what's going to be coming their way. Haven Guard, I mean, it takes a lot for the Haven Guard to say defeat seems certain, but again, a large part of that is going to be the sheer numbers against them, and stuff like Fountain Guard and Nimlothian Honor Guard being involved in said overwhelming numbers. Dol Amroth, though, thus far, still clinging to life. Parathil champions defeat seems certain for them as well. What are the Lords of Gondor doing? They need to be used a little bit more aggressively, I think, or they can be used to try and delay the coming of the Dol Amroth forces over there. But one way or another, they need to be used better and more actively. As already mentioned, Dol Amroth have used their cavalry more actively, and not every one of their charges has been super effective. You can see here that they have been utilising them consistently throughout the whole battle. Lords of Gondor may be guilty of dragging their heels a little bit. If you're going to bring a unit of expensive cavalry like that, you do need to use them to their fullest. Especially if you're defenders, really. There goes a Dol Amroth general. I believe that's 3 dead Gondorian generals, 2 dead Dol Amrothian generals. Parathil champions coming across now to try and make something happen in this engagement over here. They may yet be able to do that. A lot of these Gondorians are now out of ammunition archers. Still, I mean, even though the Lords of Gondor were hunting them down, still the Arathurim are alive. Lords of Gondor now breaking off. Downhill charge into the ranges of Nimrodel. Too juicy a target to resist. Lots of damage done, but also taking a lot of damage from the archers that are in behind them as well. And the Haven Guard won't prove to be a squishy first target to get through now, so we'll see how that affects things. Vets of Osgiliath. Defeat is a distinct possibility for the Dol Amroth spearmen. You wouldn't be too surprised by that either. I would say though, the chaos of this fight over here is still very much a factor. A real mosh pit of a fight, which I think Gondor will squeak out a narrow victory against. Still with a good amount of Fountain Guard. Still 47 Nimrothian Honor Guard as well, so good quality around which to try and base some defence. It's a big ask though. Big ask to try and finish off what remains of Dol Amroth. Still a few units making their way across. Still of course with some ranged support as well, which always going to be useful. Arrow fire going into the Lords of Gondor.
The enemy army flees the field. Pursue and run them down.
Lords of Gondor could yet be something to turn this battle around with though. Getting a few good charges into those slightly squishier archers, and the numbers discrepancy suddenly doesn't look quite so daunting for Gondor. This is a close one, this though. Both sides have had their really dominant moments in the fight, and now, when all is said and done, Dol Amroth come into the dying embers of the fight with the edge, but nothing is set in stone just yet. Still some Arathurium alive. Haven Guard, with a few of the rank and file of Dol Amroth making up the melee contingent. Yet another unit of Haven Guard for these Gondorians to try and take on. In fact, there's still some halberdiers left, could prove to be vital as well. A little bit of a disappointing charge there maybe from the Lords of Gondor against exactly the kind of unit that they should be going after. They need enough room to get those lances down. Splatter that unit against the snow. Another unit of halberds, decently healthy as well, 86 of them. Haven Guard, who are stuck against a fence. These are the kind of things which the players need to pay close attention to, because if they can get a second unit of Haven Guard on the front line, I don't think Gondor's infantry is going to have what it takes. But if they delay too long, there's always the possibility. Actually, a distinct possibility for many of the Dol Amroth forces. But they've still ranges of Nimrodal with ammunition shooting up the line, all just hammering home their advantage still. Lords of Gondor trying to hound these Dol Amroth archers, but I think it might just be a little bit too much for Gondor to bear at this point. They can still make it a very close affair, but I think the quality, the type of units that both sides have remaining to them, that may be that. Here's another Dol Amroth general though. I believe that's 3 all. Indeed, there is another Gondorian general poking out the back. They tend to blend in more than the Imrahil clones as well, so we find the other Imrahil, the one that remains. Unless I've just miscounted and all of the Dol Amroth generals are in fact dead. Lords of Gondor going after the strong point of archers that Dol Amroth still have. Only 10 of Gondor's cav remain, however. Victory. Complete surrounding of the Gondorians now, many of them breaking also. Like the Nimrothian Honor Guard will fight to the bitter end, and any veterans of Osgiliath that are in there will do the same, but the Fountain Guard and Guards of Osgiliath routing under the strain of being surrounded on all sides. Lords of Gondor, are they all dead now? I think they might be. One of them, I think, kind of hovering in mid-air, still in a battle stance. He died as he lived. Oh no, there are the Lords of Gondor. 8 of them still remain. That was more like it. If they'd have managed to do such things when the cavalry unit was a little bit more substantial, it would have given Gondor a little bit more hope than they currently have, but as it is, 3% the difference, and that probably will be 4 by the time the battle is out, but that still marks a very close contest. Credit to Dol Amroth as well. Like I said at the start of the fight, Gondor are more set up for this kind of battle than Dol Amroth are, especially when you look at the relative strengths and weaknesses of both sides. But perhaps it was Gondor splitting off 2 and 2, isolating themselves from one another. Dol Amroth, you could argue, had that as well, but Adin Men and T.S. Niehoff would have been able to move units across the field should the need have arose. It was a lot of choke points as well for 2 Gondorian armies to have to deal with on this side and on the other side. Very, very similar. Lots of ways to get up onto these raised plateaus, which initially served Gondor quite well with those pot shots they were taking into Tommy's army and TS's army. When all's said and done, when Dol Amroth were in a position to finally commit and pressurise all sides, even if it was a little bit broken up and not necessarily in sync with one another, it was good enough that it was always going to be difficult for Gondor to come back from that. Amroth archers finishing off what remains of some sort of Gondorian unit in here as the cheers start to ring out. I mean, this is pretty much all that Dol Amroth have left to them from an infantry standpoint. Ah, a joust, is it? One of the Arathurim against one of the Lords of Gondor. I think the Arathurim still more effective in cavalry to cavalry combat. One swing. There we go. And that is going to be that. So yeah, like I said, maybe the decision to split off 2 and 2 worked against Gondor in the end. But I don't want to take too much away from Dol Amroth, because what was a fairly questionable start, in the sense that there wasn't much they could have done about it really in order to stack up effectively on every side. They were going to have to put themselves in harm's way of Gondor's archers, so it was always going to be a little bit more difficult for them initially. But the point was, as long as they were willing to then be aggressive and make it so the battle didn't go the way that Gondor wanted it to go, that was always going to be key. And Dol Amroth ultimately did that, and that is why I think we're finishing this battle looking at a Dol Amroth victory where, if I had to pick between the two at the start, like I said, I probably would have predicted a Gondor win, just based on the factions alone and what kind of battle it was. But fair play to Dol Amroth, though it is perhaps quite fitting that one of Dol Amroth's better weapons were their Arathurim, and how disruptive they were. Let's see what did the damage for Gondor. So Nimlothian Honor Guard, obviously very, very effective throughout the battle as a general rule. Whenever Gondor were in trouble and they needed a bit of quality, the Nimlothian Honor Guard were there and they were effective. Veterans of Osgiliath and Gondor archers will have got many kills. I'm sure when we look at the other armies as well, that will be the case. The archers were effective. Pelargia Marines maybe slightly less so. Citadel Guard a little bit more underwhelming as well. Axemen of Lasarnak, plenty of armour piercing in the Gondor roster, which did okay, but maybe not as domineering as I thought it might have been. Again, Nimlothian Honor Guard doing very well for themselves. Many units breaking 100 kills, including Fountain Guard and Citadel Guard. Pelargia Marines again, maybe slightly underwhelming. The Archer's actually not so impressive from Dabo either, but his elite infantry was good. As for Hidden, lots of kills from the Nimlothians again, nearly cracking 400, which is impressive. And the Fountain Guard, especially when you consider what sort of pressure he was being put under towards the end. Lots of units of stuff like the Haven Guard and Parathil Champions, so lots of good kills there. The Athelian Rangers were effective as well at taking those shots early on, and the Womb Raider also, again, a couple of units breaking 200, Nimlothian Honor Guard and the Veterans of Osgiliath, both units proving their prowess in this battle across multiple armies, and the Athelian Rangers as well doing okay for themselves. So yeah, that was an interesting one. Again, this is a battle that I'm 99.99% sure I have shown in previous versions of the game. I cannot remember what it's called, but based on the factions involved, we'll have to say that this battle took place somewhere in the foothills of the White Mountains, I think. But yeah, I will be able to update my game now to the most recent version and get on with a couple of the battles that I was sent from that, so that'll be good. I don't think I'll be going and taking another trip away for work in the immediate future. I could be wrong about that. There may yet be one trip left this year before everything does start to grind to a halt, so to speak. But we'll see. Again, it won't affect my schedule too much, I don't think, at this point, based on how the replays are coming in at more of a trickle due to the stage in development that the patch seems to be at. Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see. I think that the schedule will remain as is for the time being. But yeah, big thank you to Dabo and Hidden, who were viewing this battle from this perspective, for sending this one in. Big thank you to all of the players for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me